This is very interesting. The marked of hell. Those who die in the Lord are blessed, the scripture says, but those who have taken the mark of the beast die outside of the Lord. They have identified themselves with a certain crowd, the people opposed to God. They have lined up with a philosophy that denies God and his work. They are in league with those who reject God. So they will die as they have lived, apart from the Lord. Hell is going to be a place of vile associations. Oh, hey guys. Yeah, I was just checking out this book here on Revelations. It seems pretty relevant today. But this video today is going to be about a draconian gun bill that recently was brought to my attention by one of our subscribers. They commented on one of our videos, and man, I heard a little bit about this HR 5717, but I had no idea how bad this thing was. And I went into congress.gov, and you can find the summary of this bill. And that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to just talk about what all this bill has in it and how draconian it is and how basically anti-Second Amendment it is. HR 5717, Gun Violence Prevention and Community Safety Act of 2020. Already the title of this thing is setting off my hackles. Gun violence, I mentioned in another video, that's an oxymoron. A gun is incapable of being violent, period. You can't have a gun be violent because a gun has no conscience. It's an inanimate object. It's no more capable of violence than a spoon in your drawer or a knife in your knife drawer or whatever. It's not possible to be violent. It's like this pen. This pen here can't be violent because it has no conscience. It's an inanimate object. So anytime you hear these people putting gun violence or these catchy phrase things like this, it's basically doublespeak. And coming up pretty soon, we're going to have a breakdown of Orwellian leftist doublespeak, so that we can maybe start to understand what they're saying whenever their talking heads are working their mouths on TV. So let's get right into this bill. It's not very long. I highly encourage you to go over to congress.gov and read this for yourself. This was introduced on January 30th, 2020. It's the Gun Violence Prevention and Community Safety Act of 2020. This bill makes various changes to the federal framework governing the sale, transfer, possession of firearms and ammunition. Among other things, the bill does the following. So this is just a summary here. I'm not going into real depth on this because I'd lose you guys. I know how it goes, man. Nobody wants to hear somebody sit here and read a whole entire House bill because it'd put you to sleep, and that's not our goal here. So we're going to go over the summary real quick, just like bullet points, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each one that kind of sets off my constitutional hackles, and hopefully yours are getting set off too, because we need to definitely take action on this. Okay, number one thing here, generally requires individuals to obtain a license to purchase, acquire, or possess a firearm or ammunition. So, if you didn't catch that, generally requires individuals to obtain a license. So you have to have a license, and the government has to decide whether you get that license or not, to purchase, acquire, or possess a firearm or ammunition. So you may be thinking, oh, this doesn't apply to me. I've already got all the firearms I need. Well, you might want to go buy ammo one day. And if you have to go up to the store and buy ammo and they're like, well, I'm not going to sell you any because you don't have this license, then you're going to be up the creek here. Your guns or your Second Amendment has basically been rendered useless by this first rule here. Number two, raise the minimum age from 18 years to 21 years to purchase firearms and ammunition. And I don't know, don't quote me on this, but I believe the way the law reads right now is if you're 21 years old, you can buy a handgun. If you're 18 years old, you can buy a rifle and any other thing like that. So I may be wrong about that, but that's how I remember it used to be anyways. And what they're wanting to do is bump it up to where you have to be 21 years old to purchase a firearm and or ammunition. I mean, that is ridiculous. I mean, you can go to war and you can die for your country, but you're not allowed to buy a firearm. Number three, establishes new background check requirements for firearm transfers between private parties. So for years we've been hearing all this stuff about this secret, the scariest thing that the left has in their Rolodex of anti-gun phrases. It's the gun show loophole. So what they're trying to do is make it to where no private party can sell a firearm between the two people there. You can't do it under this bill. You'd have to have an FFL, Firearms, a federally licensed firearms dealer, to make this transaction happen for you. And that also means that, let's say your grandpa has a big collection of firearms, and maybe one day you're supposed to inherit that firearm, a certain one or whatever. Well, under this bill, if this passes, you won't be able to inherit that thing without going through a federally licensed firearm dealer to make sure that that's all registered up and you're licensed and all this stuff. So, this just gets worse and worse. Number 4, requires law enforcement agencies to be notified following a firearms-related background check that results in denial. So if you go and fill out your firearms form to buy a firearm, just like you have to do now when you buy a firearm from a store or from a gun store or something like that, you have to fill out that form for the government, right? Well, if it comes back and is denied, then basically they're going to call law enforcement and let them know that you were denied for whatever reason. And I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty damn scary to me. Number 5 here, creates a statutory process for family or household member to petition a court for extreme risk protection order to remove firearms from an individual who possesses a risk of committing violence. So if you guys have heard of the red flag laws that have been popping up all around the country, this is basically a federal version of that. So it would apply across the entire United States, and anybody could make up anything and say, oh, well, so-and-so is unstable and we need to take his guns away from, or her guns away from her. And we better go get on the ball and do that. And basically this gives them the ability to allow a snitch in your family to come forth and say, oh, this guy is dangerous, whether you really are or not. That's the point of this. That's the draconian side of this. Someone could use this maliciously against you just to make sure you're disarmed. And I don't know about you guys, but I've got a few leftists in my family, and I don't trust them. They might call up the police and say, oh, he's unstable because he's talking about the Constitution and the Second Amendment and liberty and all these other things that I like to talk about on the channel and in real life. So that is a slippery slope. Next up here, we've got restricts the import, sale, manufacture, transfer, or possession of semi-automatic assault weapons and large capacity ammunition feeding devices. Magazines, or clips as the liberals like to call them. So basically, if you're importing anything, the way I read this, if you're importing anything that can be construed to be a semi-automatic assault weapon, then, or has a large capacity magazine, it restricts that. It restricts the manufacture, sale, transfer, purchase, or receipt of ghost guns, i.e. guns without serial numbers. So if you've got an old gun that you were handed down, maybe it's an old a musket or something that your granddad gave you or something like that, and it's early enough that it doesn't actually have a original serial number on it or whatever, or maybe the serial number's rubbed off. Well, they're going to call this a ghost gun, and suddenly that gun is illegal. If you get caught with that gun, it will be taken away from you and probably chopped up with a cutting saw. They love to do that. Next up, we've got makes trafficking in firearms a standalone criminal offense. And I went ahead and looked up what trafficking means, and it's just basically if you sell something that is deemed illegal to sell that way, then they consider that trafficking. So you could sell one .22 pistol or something to, your best buddy from high school, and if all of a sudden you don't follow all of their rules and dot the I's and cross the T's and do everything exactly the way this bill says, then they're going to consider you a firearms trafficker. And doesn't that sound terrible? Normally, we used to just call that, selling a gun to your buddy or something, but now it's going to be called trafficking in firearms. And of course, they like to name things stuff, like that, so that it sounds really terrible whenever you're being taken to court or whatever, and they can run their 24-hour news cycle where they don't let you talk, but they keep coming on and saying, oh, this guy here, he's involved in firearms trafficking, which obviously sounds horrible, and it's going to paint the picture that you're a terrible person. So automatically the jury is going to be like, whoa, wait a second, looking at you with a raised eyebrow, aren't they? So I don't think that's fair under our current system. Okay, it requires federally licensed gun dealers to submit and annually certify compliance with a security plan to detect and deter firearm theft. So basically the way that I read this one if you're unaware of this, I know a few gun store owners and stuff over the years. I've met with them and talked with them about some of the things that they have to deal with just to be able to sell legally under the current circumstances. This is going to add a mountain of paperwork on top of what they already have to do. And they already have a mountain of paperwork. I think they're basically trying to bog these people down with so much paperwork that's eventually everybody makes a mistake. And when you do make that mistake, they'll take your gun license away from you. So they're going to make it much, much, much harder for anybody to be a gun dealer if this bill passes. And remember, this has not been voted on in the House yet. It was just basically a House resolution. They put it forth. It has not been approved in the House yet, but we need to stop this thing early on to let them know we're not going to put up with this. Okay, next up we've got removes limitations on the civil liability of gun manufacturers. This is huge. This is a huge one right here. The civil liability, it removes limitations on the civil liability of gun manufacturers. What that basically means is if some idiot gets a hold of a gun and goes out and accidentally shoots himself or something, or shoots someone else and harms someone else, then that idiot will be able to sue the gun manufacturers, and they will probably win, because the way this thing is set up, it's set up for the victim to be the winner, essentially. This is not a good deal, and I'm worried. My wife and I were talking about this earlier. What's to stop somebody that's like a really strong anti-Second Amendment, anti-constitutionalist to come in there and go, hey, you know what? I'm going to shoot myself in the leg just so I can, sue the gun manufacturer and put Smith & Wesson out of business, let's say, or put, Ruger out of business because I don't like them selling guns. They're evil. This opens up the door for a ton of abuse. This thing, and again, I'm reading the summary, so maybe it goes into more depth if you actually read the full bill, but I doubt it. These people are about as shallow as a puddle out in your yard here, so they don't have a whole lot of depth to them. Their obvious agenda is to ruin the Second Amendment, destroy the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and strip us of our God-given right to bear arms. Okay, so next up, we've got allows the Consumer Product Safety Commission to issue safety standards for firearms and firearm components. Are you kidding me? Now, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, I believe, already exists, but they're going to roll in firearms to where these people have to say, yes, these meet the safety standards. Well, what's to say that someone doesn't get in there in this safety commission and say, you know what, all firearms are unsafe? Then they could say, hey, your products are not allowed to be sold. Whether the company cranked out 100 million of these things or not, these people could put them out of business. It's another attack on the manufacturers here. This is terrible. Only two more left here. Establishes a community violence intervention grant program and promotes research on firearms safety and gun violence prevention. Well, again, as I said at the beginning of the video, there is no such thing as gun violence. This is just made up terms that don't really mean anything. Are they talking about shootings? Because that's what we used to call them back in the day when people had a lot more common sense. But now everybody has to put these fancy words and sprinkle perfume on top of them to make them evoke an emotion. Well, screw that. I can read through the lines here. I see what they're saying. They want to ban firearms. That's essentially what this is. This is a soft ban. And honestly, I mentioned it a couple of videos ago in the 10 communist rules. I don't know how many people actually made it to the end of that video, but number 10 was I don't remember exactly the wordage of it, but they basically said that they're going to ban firearms. And first they're going to do it through registration. They're going to require everybody, 100% of gun owners in the United States, to register their firearms. The reason they want to register your firearms is because if they know who owns the firearms, and they know your address, then they can easily come to your house and take them from you. It's pretty clear. So guys, this is the most call to action video I've ever done. I'm asking you, please go out. You need to call your congressman. I know a lot of people think that we're at the point in the game right now where it's too late. We need to use the Second Amendment to save everything else, but I completely disagree with that. I guarantee you, with as many lazy people are out there that haven't even done the bare minimum. The bare minimum is voting. If you go vote, you think, oh yeah, I've done my civic duty. Well, that's not true. There's a whole bunch more to it. You have to hold these politicians' feet to the fire. It ain't just elect a guy when he comes around your house and gives you smiles and, all of his false different things he says he's going to do. You got to make the dude do those things, or the gal or whatever. You got to make them do those things that they say they're going to do. And the way you do that is you talk to your friends, you talk to your family, and you say, hey, what do you think about this H.R. 5717? I guarantee you a lot of them are going to say, oh, don't worry about that. That'll never pass. That is exactly how they get you. That's exactly how they pulled a lot of this draconian wool right over all of our eyes, is because we were lazy and we sat there and went, oh, well, they'll never pass that. Come on, man, that's too crazy. That'll never happen in America. And yet, here we are, guys, with a big portion of the country still locked down, although some states are starting to open up. But, we've just seen so much draconian stuff as a result of this COVID-19 thing and this pandemic and all this panic and all this stuff that's been going on that, if you're surprised by this, or if you think for a second that they wouldn't pass this thing, even the Senate, which is run by Republicans supposedly. Well, guess what? Mitch McConnell just the other day passed a bill allowing the FBI to go into all of your previous history on your internet history and stuff like that and use that stuff. He basically took the Patriot Act and, if it was a balloon, he went and pumped a whole bunch more air into that balloon. It's completely unconstitutional. The original Patriot Act was unconstitutional. So let me ask you this. Who is up there? Who is up there that you know? Which representative of yours in your state is actually a constitutional person? Who is actually following, defending, upholding the Constitution that works for you? Because remember, folks, these people work for you and me. They don't work for the government. They don't work for Trump. We owe, very little allegiance to the president, no matter who the guy is. That, we don't have much control over that office, is what I'm trying to say. Where you do have control? Your local state representatives, your national representatives that represent your state. You need to call every one of these guys, and you need to make sure, especially on the national level, you need to make sure that H.R. 5717 goes into the dustbin of history and never rears its ugly head again. So guys, this stuff is critical. It's not about voting. It is about voting, but it's not just about voting. It's about doing your civic duty, and that means holding the politicians' feet to the fire. It's not a threat. When you do contact them, you want to be very civil, you want to be cordial, you want to be polite, but you don't have to kiss their ass. They're not celebrities. They work for you. They work for me. So don't forget that. And I think it's high time we remind them who they work for. So guys, please, 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 if you ever hear anything that I've said, we have to start a campaign, a grassroots campaign to stop this kind of stuff. It's the only way those politicians can hear anything past all the lobbyists running in and out of their offices. Long live the Constitution. Protect the Second Amendment. We'll see you next time.